True story. You can't do it justice like we don't do it.
Well, I can't remember it all.
I'd have to sit down and think
I'll
about
change
it.
it.
I'm gonna fool you
Work
guys.
too hard, otherwise, okay.
The bad thing about it is, there's a few here that probably went to the old Livingston Academy.
I remember when
Yep,
they tore it down.
are you the only one here?
No.
Oh, okay.
Phyllis did.
Phyllis sitting over in the corner. Yeah, okay. Bill Winningham always told a true story on that Livingston Academy about a person that was found. I'll keep you hanging in August. We'll give you a great recap.
Okay, you're gonna make us wait.
Yeah. Well, I don't wanna mess it up. That's the
Well,
problem.
they found it in the gym of the main building. I remember when they tore the gym down in '88.
Yeah, okay, folks, it's, time to, do the public hearing on ordinance 2021-6-2 and 2021-6-3 and 2021-6-4. What we have here, John, do you wanna talk about it real quick?
Yeah, let me find it. One of the ordinances was the city adopting a policy concerning abandoned property that sometimes comes into the hands of the city. And, the other one was an ordinance that amended our, slum clearance ordinances concerning the, authority of the public officer to demolish properties if the property poses a threat to public safety. That was the only amendment that was made to our existing slum ordinance. And that ordinance was, the language in this amended ordinance was the language that was recommended by Ms. Ashburn, the legal consultant within PASS, basically on some issues that we were having with our existing ordinance.
Those are the ordinances in here?
Everybody.
I think they're in the back.
Okay.
Sorry.
I looked through it, but I didn't. Are there any questions on these, or anybody? We publicize these, of course. I didn't know if anybody had any questions about them, or had been questioned about them. Is there anyone here that would like to address the council on these ordinances? Rick, it's good to see you in a good part of the state tonight. Not way down in East Tennessee, or not way out in, I'm sorry, Rex Barton, not
Yeah,
Rex Dale,
I
sorry.
realize that when you look at it. It's unusual to
Yeah.
have another Rex in there.
Yeah. So, John, these ordinances is what we, as recommended by, Ms. Ashburn, University of Tennessee MTS, to kind of tighten up some things to allow us to, move forward.
That's correct. The 406 of chapter 4 do not provide, it's either that or the 307. One of the prior ordinance that was in effect didn't allow the public officer the authority to demolish a structure if it was deemed unsafe and unfit. But this ordinance does authorize that.
Okay. Board members, is there any discussion on this?
This allows him to make that decision on his discretionary alone, right? He can make that decision by himself.
If the public officer determines that the building cannot be made habitable for human occupation or use, then they have the authority, assuming they give proper notice to the property owner and the owner fails to remedy the condition, then it will give that authority. Of course, the property owner still has their due process rights and can appeal the decision and still request a hearing before the hearing officer. But if no action is taken by the property owner to remedy or repair the structure, then yes, the public officer under this ordinance would have the authority to demolish it. And Mr. Langford, the ordinance further defines what the criteria for determining that it should be demolished. That's in section 13-406, subsection 2. It states that if the repair, alteration, or improvement of the structure cannot be made at a reasonable cost in relation to the value of the structure, which is exceeding 50% of the reasonable value, then the city officer could require the owner to remove or demolish the property.
I must be fast, cause I swear to you, I know what Verizon says, but I've got about 2 minutes after. David, I seen a boat over there in your yard, you been on Dale Holler?
Yeah, just got that thing out. Maybe rubbing on it a little bit, but I
Clean her
doubt-
up. You know what they say a boat stands for?
What's that?
Work out another 1,000.
The thousands is gone. And the boat may go too.
That's what they say boat stands for.
That's a good one.
Break out another 1,000.
I don't know if it'll ever make it to the water or not.
Okay, is there anyone here to talk about this public hearing on these ordinances? Okay, board members, do you have any more discussion or any questions for Mr. Meadows as we get ready to go on to second reading? Okay. John, anything else to add to or take away?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I'm showing about 6:04. So we're gonna go ahead and call the meeting to order. If you would please stand for prayer. Pledge of allegiance. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and all the many blessings, Lord. We thank you once again for allowing us to come together as a board here. We pray that we make all of our decisions in accordance with thy will. Pray for our country and the men and women that serve it, Lord, that you will put thy hand around them, bring them back home safe and sound if it be thy will. Lord, we pray for sick, and especially the ones that we know that you will put your healing hand on them and restore them back to much wanted health and being all well. We ask you to forgive us of our sins. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Chief Etheridge, can you lead us in the pledge of allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chief. Roll call, Ms. Bills.
Alderman Clark,
Present.
Alderman Coleman,
Present.
Alderman Dale,
Present.
Alderman Dodson,
Present.
Alderman Langford,
Present.
Alderman Speck,
Present.
all present.
All present, so we will go, need a motion, to approve the minutes from last month's meeting. Motion made by Alderman Speck, for a second. Second by Alderman Rexdale. Any discussion? All for the motion, let it know by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign, motion passed. I do have one, addition, to the agenda, please. It would be a memorandum of memorandum of understanding with Overton County. I think that, we got that to you as quickly as we could, but I would like for discussion to have that, add that to the agenda. It'd be item number 4, under new business. Is there a motion to add? Motion made by Vice Mayor Dodson to add to the agenda.
Second.
Second by Alderman Coleman. Any discussion? All for the motion, let it know by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign, motion passed. So item number 4 would be the memorandum of understanding, from Overton County. Under old business, item number 1, police evidence procedure. We have with us today is Mr. Rex Barton, from the University of Tennessee Municipal Technical Advisory Service.
Is it okay to
Mouthful, yes, sir.
sit up here on the end?
Pull your chair up.
I'm gonna let somebody else move that so I don't mess it up. There we go.
Yeah, there's a chair behind you too if you want to pull it
Stand up and spread out here for a minute.
up. Okay.
Good to see you all in person instead of looking at the front of a podium. And I've joined a number of Zoom meetings over the last year and a half, when we were in lockdown, but I always saw everybody. And that was very disconcerting for me. And also, we had to use the phones, and I was hearing echoing, and I think you asked me a question I wasn't prepared for after I was already kind of going, what's going on here? So it was,
Not me.
yeah, it was not fun. First of all, let me tell you something. You all are not the first to face an issue like you are here. I'm not trying to belittle the issue. You're not the first, and unfortunately, you won't be the last. And to give you an example of that, as I was going back digging through notes, one of the things I came across was the email string I think you initiated with Melissa Ashburn about the requirement to put money in the bank. And our lawyers were actually having a little trouble finding that. I had it, because I teach a class at it. And I don't know if she replied back and gave that to you, but I've got that in my notes here. And it's a statute that says all funds received by cities and counties must be deposited in the bank within 3 business days. And we always look at that as being the money that belongs to the city. And if you're a cop and you go to the police academy, they beat into your head chain of custody. So you never put something in the bank until suddenly you say the comptroller's office tells you about this law. Well, I don't think it sounds like that. And they said, well, it doesn't matter. We do, and we're the ones who are most important. So that's how we get where we do sometimes with property evidence. So no consolation for you guys, but I've been involved in the same kind of process with cities the size as Memphis and Knoxville, my hometown, about 7 or 8 years ago.
Athens?
Yes, sir. And Bean Station. I mean, I've been involved several times. Our role at MTAS is we're not investigators. We don't investigate, even in the best of times. We certainly don't ever step on someone's toes when someone else is doing an investigation or review, whether the comptroller's office, TBI, or internal, whatever. But we review things from the perspective of trying to suggest improvements that can make things better. So, where I misspoke we're in July now, right?
That's right.
Where I misspoke in the June meeting about reviewing policy, I had reviewed 2 of the policies for the police department. Since then, I had not reviewed the one relative to the property room audits, because we were trying to stay focused on the process of things in and out of the property room. So back then, I sent an email to Mayor Hayes, and he forwarded that on to the chief of some changes that I recommended being made immediate. Number one, about cash, but also some changes to some policy that I think are inadvertent. There are little funny, quirky things that Tennessee has that other states don't have. So when I think well-intentioned, picked up some written directives from some accredited agencies to put in place for the police department. They omitted a couple of those requirements that are actually required by the state of Tennessee, which is another reason why we continue to have some of those things around the state. So I made those suggestions for some immediate changes there. Subsequent to that, the chief then put together a package of changes he wanted to make and I keep saying policy and procedures, really procedures. And that's what we brought to the May meeting. I think you guys had just received it. So we wanted to talk about it again at the June meeting, which obviously I messed up on. Those have since been codified. Since the June meeting, the chief and I have corresponded a lot by email, where he's taken those changes and actually put them into the written directive format, and combining 2 distinct written directives in the old processes into one, which I think is a good idea. Clarified exact processes for guns, drugs, cash, things like that. I've checked off on those. The reason we corresponded back and forth, so I made some suggestions back and forth. I think you have those with you. You also have the original policies and procedures. And in those, there's one on collection and preservation of evidence I haven't gone into. The very end of it does get into bringing that evidence into the evidence room, but I think that's going to be superseded with the new policy. But I didn't get into the collection and preservation because that's crime scene stuff. We also looked at evidence, property, and control, which I think will be replaced with the new policy.
Does anybody have the evidence and property control?
That's right.
The old one, the original? It's not in there. We have the new one, but the original's not in there.
I've got it if you want to look at it.
It's right after evidence and it says audit.
It's probably, there's
Does it
one
say
file that was
evidence,
printed.
Audit, inspection, or subject?
There's one of those that there's 2 stapled together in your batch. I actually separated them in mine.
If you keep going, it says audit at the top.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, never mind.
So if you don't mind me looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, of course, I want to. Is this the old of this?
No.
That's
What
what I
you're looking
thought.
for is this, and there's one in here. It's probably, there's one thick one where they're stapled together. I
These were
think.
the 3 that I had.
One of those is 2, I believe.
Okay, let me check. All right.
If not, I can make quick copies, but I
No,
think
no,
we put
it's-
everything in there, right, Phyllis?
Here it is. It's probably in this one.
11112.
That's it. Now you go back to the front page one more time. No, that's audit and inspection. That's a separate one there. But there was one of them, the file that I had, there were 2 of them together.
Evidence and property control, which one you're looking for?
I'm looking for the old evidence and property.
Yeah, it's in there.
Did you find it?
Evidence and property
Keep
control,
going, it's like
there it
2 more
is.
pages after,
Did you get it, Ken?
evidence and audit.
Oh, yeah, it's 2 pages after.
2 pages after.
Go
what?
after the old.
See the one where it says old?
There should be 2 pages. I think you went to 3.
Oh, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Okay,
the new-
evidence and property, new evidence and property. Oh, got it.
And
Got it.
the proposal
You
for,
mind?
this is what I want to ask you to direct your attention to. Did you put a header on the one they have?
Yes.
Okay, what you're seeing is new. actually takes the place of two of the old ones, okay? Now, I don't have it with the header format because this is the content that went into it.
The only thing that's different is that actual headers.
Yeah, that little box up there with all the title stuff. And this takes the place of evidence and property control as well as, I got too much stuff out
And
here.
it's 13 pages, is that correct? The one that says new,
Yes, it is.
it's
Yeah.
13 pages.
Yeah, it looks-
And it
Okay.
takes the place of two of these.
It does, it takes the place of evidence audit and inspection and evidence and property control. And it
Evidence
will super-
audit and inspection and evidence property control?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think you're just rolling audit and inspection into the new evidence, property and control.
So there's an evidence, there's an audit section in
At
this
the
new.
very end, yes,
Okay.
sir, at the very end.
Oh, God, it's confusing.
Isn't it fun? So, now the collection, preservation, and processing of evidence that I think you may have too there. Most of this is not addressed with the new one, but there are a few things in here that intermesh, and, this would supersede those few little things, but I think that's okay. So,
Did you highlight, like, what changed from the old to the new, or?
no, because
just
we
need
were
to go
doing this by
through?
email back and forth, and I'm not sure if the chief did a tracking changes or not.
So basically, we need to read the old and the new and kind of figure out for ourselves what
I'm gonna
changed.
suggest something, that you read the new. That's just what I would do. It's asking you to trust me a lot, having done this for a lot of years. I think the new proposal fits the needs of the police department, and you said there's two or three things I think that are important there. If I can find. Number one, it addresses the TCA citation of revenues received by the city have to be deposited in the bank, regardless of whether it's seized money or not seized money, even though it's not your money yet. It also addresses some things in Title 39, relative to firearms. It actually addresses several things in there, that had changed over time with legislation, and, the agencies, a lot of agencies didn't pick those up. We do, I think, as a state, do a really poor job of letting our law enforcement officials know what changes the legislature makes. And we do a legislative update every year, but you gotta get it on your schedule to go there. The, Police Chiefs Association does an update, but a lot of things fall through the cracks. And, so that policy and procedure, the new one, the recommended new one that you have addresses a bunch of those little subtle things that were out of compliance with either a state rule or state law. And I think it simplifies matters a whole bunch. I think one of the things that's happened was, with good intent, picking up some sample policy from some accredited agencies and putting them in place, but Livingston, how many officers you got, Chief? 20 officers. And, when you go to, say, Franklin, they have about 100 officers or so, and they've got a full-time sergeant who does nothing with property and evidence, and they have, a civilian who does nothing but property and evidence. You go to Alcoa, which is not a real big town. I want to say Alcoa's less than 10,000. Of course, they butt up against Maryville and Knoxville, so they police a little bigger. They have a full-time civilian who does nothing but property and evidence. After hours, she's on call for a crime scene technician too, but her 8 to 5, Monday through Friday job is property and evidence. In small towns, you don't have that luxury. What you have is people who've got a lot of other irons in the fire, a lot of other responsibilities they have to take care of. But I teach a drug fund class, I promise I'll pull that back into the conversation eventually. But I teach a drug fund class. I talk about the importance of proper paperwork, documenting cash transactions, because dope dealers don't take purchase orders from the city. They don't tend to give you a receipt, so you have to document those. One of the problems is if you start to do one of those at 11 o'clock at night, it never happens at 11 o'clock at night. It happens at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you've been up waiting for it. So you finally make the dope deal. Well, I'll finish the paperwork when I come in the morning. Well, a city this size is not going to have a narcotics investigator to come in the next morning. You got 2 businesses that burglarized overnight. So it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon before those guys get free. Do they remember to go back and fill out the paperwork? Nope. So you have the issue with property and evidence of having folks who are responsible for that, having a lot of other responsibilities too. So when I come in as a consultant, and I think you all know my background is in law enforcement. When I come in as a consultant, I want people to develop procedures that will work as far as chain of custody, as far as proper custody and proper documentation, proper evidence. But I wanna have a process that can be followed without it being so cumbersome that things fall by the wayside. And I think that's what we've ultimately achieved. The chief has put some pretty tight stuff in there, and I talked him into easing some of it back to make it more workable. And I did not track, because the chief and I were exchanging these by emails in parcels. I know that's a lot to digest, but I'd be happy to answer any specific questions you have, particularly any questions you've had lingering through time over the last few months. Or if you'd like, I can hit you some high spots as we go. Y'all wanna do that?
I don't know. One of the questions I had when I read through this, there's just a couple of places where instead of saying chief of police, it says Chief Etheridge or Captain Smith. Obviously, those need to be generic, but,
Well, here, let me address that for a second. I'm glad you said that. At some point in time, I'm gonna say in a year, the chief of police or Chief Etheridge needs to be completely out of the policy anyway. I think right now, that's a good idea for him to be there and taking sole responsibility. As you move forward and this review by the state is over with, I think the chief of police does not need to be a part of this integral part of all of this. It needs to be designating someone else and holding those people accountable rather than being the person accountable. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, you do need to make that generic because people come and go. But just as importantly, and I meant to tell you all that on the front end, I think you need to,
Yeah.
that it needs, at some point in time, needs to change away.
So what you're saying is that you've recommended in this new policy, what y'all come up with, which states that the chief is solely basically responsible.
Short term, yes, sir.
Short term. Okay, why would it not make more sense than to wait until the investigation's complete, see what they're gonna recommend,
Because you pointed out,
and then change the policies?
Because you
Because you're
pointed-
saying this is a temporary policy?
no, all but that one part, I think it can be permanent. Because you pointed out at the last meeting that the old policy had 4 people, and you don't want that at all. This is too small an agency for 4 people. You brought that up yourself.
Yeah, I did, cause that's what it said.
Yeah.
Right.
So moving to the new one has 2.
No, it says that the chief of police may.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, I think it should say that the chief of police shall. I don't think
Read
single
the whole
control.
paragraph that you're doing there.
The chief of police may appoint or assign no more than 2 individuals to serve as evidence custodians within the police department to assist with evidence and property sections to be.
Ultimately, I think that's what your policy will end up being without the references that he had mentioned before to the chief.
But it says may appoint, right?
He could appoint 1 or could appoint 2.
But it says he may.
Yes. He could appoint, that way he could appoint 1 or he could appoint 2.
Or he could do it himself.
I wouldn't.
Right, that's what it says.
It's short term, I think
But it
it's a good-
doesn't say in the short term until the investigation's complete.
Because it's policy. You're right, you're talking policy rather than a general conversation, okay? I don't see an issue with it,
Okay.
so.
I think having anybody that has single control over basically cash or a vault is not good policy.
But you're not gonna have cash, the cash's not gonna be there anymore.
But what you're suggesting is in, say, a year or 2 years, we come back and change this to say the chief of police shall appoint instead of may appoint.
Yes, sir. And I think that gives the latitude that as this move, because we don't know when this review will be over.
Right.
They've never been known for speed. So, I think when I say a year, they may walk in 2 days from now and say they're finished, but I wouldn't think so.
And in the new one, it says that an audit should be done annually, right?
Yes, sir.
Versus the semi-annual?
Yes, sir.
Why is the change?
Because, it's just like I said before, you got people with a lot of irons in the fire.
Mhm.
I think 1's sufficient, number 1. When you start adding 2, 3, 4 things that are supposed to get done in a year, you're gonna find something that doesn't get done because somebody's sick, somebody's on vacation, and it didn't happen, and we had 2 burglaries, and then
Right.
you forget to go buy them.
Right.
When you have 1, it's a lot easier to prioritize that, put it on the calendar and say, guys, nobody goes on vacation this week. This gets done.
I think that makes good sense. However, it appears to me, when you read the old policy, we had a semi-annual inspection requirement, okay? We had 4 people that were in charge of were custodians of the evidence room. I don't think a lack of policies is what caused this event. So I personally have a problem reviewing policies and changing policies until this investigation is complete. That's my position.
I'm not gonna argue, but one of
Yeah.
the things that as a policy wonk myself, I think your old policy needed to be changed. I don't think the comptroller's office will have an issue with the changes that are there. I will tell you a little quick story about a friend of mine who had a similar situation as you all. And, comptroller's office came in and did an investigation, and he waited until it was completed. And he drew up some new policies and procedures, and much like, Chief Etheridge did, they were pretty tight, intense properties and procedures. And he sent them to me and asked me to review them, and I said, I can't recommend you do this. Because eventually people aren't gonna do it because there's a lot of stuff in it that's superfluous. It doesn't gain anything except add additional steps. Well, I ran it by the comptroller's office and they loved it. Well, of course they did. They're not the ones who have to follow it. And I'm making light of that, but that's actually serious. You've got a 20-man department with a lot of stuff to do. The more things that you have on the books, for instance, picking up something from Columbia, Tennessee, and taking their policy and putting it in place, which I believe is where some of these have come from. They're a lot bigger than you guys. They got a lot more people, and they got people they can assign full-time to do certain things. So your old policy made sense for Columbia. It quite frankly shouldn't have ever been put in place here. It was well-intentioned, but it shouldn't have been put in place.
Yeah, but that was the policy.
It was.
Yeah.
Now, my point is, I think that going ahead and changing to what can be done that will, number one, incorporate state law stuff, because your old policy didn't do that. You're in violation of state law. So fixing those things as well as some process thing makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Well, do you think it makes sense that if you had individuals who apparently at the time of this event were custodians of the evidence room, who are now still custodians of the evidence room during the investigation? Do you think that makes sense?
It is a thing there. We all know the money wasn't in the property room. So, no.
I don't know that.
No.
Maybe somebody else does, but
So, no.
we haven't been told that. I mean, it would seem like to me that whoever was in charge of custodian of the evidence room then
I think
should
though,
be.
hang on, I think though one of the things you're getting at is the chief, is you had some people who were doing it, you had 4 people named, including the chief who could do it.
Sure.
The chief didn't do it before, somebody else was doing it, okay? So, he's taken a lot of responsibility, that's why this short-term stuff is in here. If something happens right now, it's no question, it's on his tail, okay? I don't really see an issue because it's not a mass thing unless the comptroller's office comes back and says something else. It is a single incident.
Yeah, I'm referring to a previous document that we got that stated that I thought the chief and the assistant in the office was custodians.
I'm not sure where we're going. I just know what I've
Isn't
looked at
that
here.
right? Wasn't Amy a custodian too, you and Amy?
She is doing the paperwork on it, but as far as physical transfers, touching, doing, whatever there is with the bag, whatever property it is, I'm the one standing there. As far as putting it into the records management system, which she's familiar with more than I am,
Mm-hmm.
then yes, she's handling that part of the process.
Okay.
The rest of the process is me.
I think you're even doing the lab transfers, right?
I take care of all the activity logs, the transfers, the physical handling of whatever it is. I've done that myself.
It's hot in here. Especially up here.
Solid aluminum building, I'm sorry. We don't meet up here much, but there were some things we had to do, but I appreciate you telling me to do.
Again,
Well,
I think.
So we had overkill policies before, is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Overkill,
I think it was well intentioned, but it was overkill policies.
yeah, and it still happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question about the very last page 13, which,
I don't have pagination on mine, so.
oh, okay, so it's the very last one,
You look up and
Of the
find me a
new
Roman
policy.
number. You talking about
Says
Roman number 14?
15, review,
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
which the last, next to last sentence makes this whole thing moot, because it says the chief of police reserves the right to make exceptions to this policy in part or whole in certain circumstances. Explain why that needs to be in there.
Let's say that you have some Supreme Court case law or Sixth Circuit case law that happens. That is definitive. You got no choice, and it's effective right then, and you don't have a board meeting coming up. Has to change, and this is a suffix. Did I use the right word? On pretty much every written directive that you have in your policy manual, specifically because of that issue. Roughly this time of year, you all would have had time to act on anything the legislature did that became effective July the 1st. But you wouldn't have had time to act on anything that became effective upon the governor signing it. And that happens throughout the legislative session. In fact, more laws are passed, signed off on by the two speakers, go to the governor's desk and sign off and become effective at that moment. That affects law enforcement. You gotta make the change. And very often we have things in a policy and procedure manual that have to change right then. That's the big example, but Sixth Circuit and Supreme Court also. Two bodies that can, and often do, make significant changes to the way we do business. And unless you all wanna do emergency meetings, he needs to be able to change it short term.
Then we probably ought to require rather than recommend that those be in writing.
Got no problem with that at all. Now, the minute that one of those things happens, it's gonna be verbal for a few minutes, but yeah, I don't have a problem with being written. Another thing in there on, one of the reasons I think that we've continued to leave that in sample policy is, for instance, if you go back to, last summer, I remember something Chief Roddy from Chattanooga said the morning after George was killed, and George Floyd, and he said, if anybody can look at that video and make a claim that we have to wait to decide if something wrong happened, they need to turn in their badge right now. And I agree with him 100%. So you have situations like that that can happen on a national scene that suddenly you say, we gotta make a change right now. I don't have a problem making it writing as long as you get the writing out quick. But those are the reasons you leave that caveat when something's approved by the board. You've got to leave the chief that opportunity in between board meetings.
Yeah, so are you recommending then that we need to make these changes now? Because an event like that we didn't have a proper policy in place to prevent that?
With the George Foreman incident?
No, with our incident.
No, but I still think.
But you use that as an example.
Oh,
so I'm
actually, yes, because you didn't have, if I can find it here. The very first thing I talked about on cash, state law. If you read it and you're not a cop, or even if you are a cop, you'd never think this applies to seized money until the comptroller's office tells you it does. I took this job 26 years ago, and I've been a cop for 17 and a half years. And when I first saw the first audit exception relative to putting seized money in the bank, I said, they're nuts. You can't do that. It's illegal. Till the folks at the comptroller's office told me they made the rule, and not the law, but they made the interpretation of the law, and that's the way it is. That's the way it is. That's not in your policy. There's also in your policy, there's some stuff in there on disposable of firearms, on the disposition of firearms, that at one time was accurate that isn't anymore. And I just don't think you leave policy that is contrary to the law in place when you know it's contrary to the law and say, well, we'll change it later.
Well, as far as the audits of evidence, room number 14, it says conducted inspection at least 15% of total inventory. Is that 15% from other places? Is that a common percent to?
I'm gonna be honest with you, except for accredited agencies, it's rare to see that clause in anybody's policy and procedure, period. So I think 15% is a good number.
Okay.
The chief was pushing 20. I suggested to him he make it 15. He wanted to do more. I thought that was a real good number. I like the idea of that audit.
That's what I was looking
Yeah,
at.
the audit was 20.
Okay. I like the idea of the audit, but again, you're pulling the old policy and procedure from accredited agencies. And most of those, under CALIA, the National Accrediting Agency, we don't have any small agencies that are nationally accredited. It costs too much money. That's why we created the state accreditation program. And agencies are either are copying someone else or in one of those two programs. They don't have an audit like this. I think 15's enough. Makes it a little easier. If you do 15, you're gonna find a problem. I also like the idea of the one other inspection during the year. The big thing is if you change custodians, you inventory everything. And that is in the accreditation standards too.
Did we do that here?
Did not look at what you've done, I looked at what I think you ought to be doing.
Okay.
Okay.
But the policy said that we were supposed to do a semi-annual inspection,
Mhm.
and you're saying go to one inspection.
One inspection.
I don't
and
understand why you would go
One
fewer, I mean audits, why would you
You got
go
an
fewer
audit,
audits?
you got an audit and
And
you
you
have
got
an
a
inspection.
random.
Yeah, you got a random also, so there is still gonna be two.
Okay.
And you go to them.
Is the random and the annual required in the new policy?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
And the reason I think you cut down on numbers somewhat, is, and the chief had more built into his recommendation, and I suggested to him strongly, you can do whatever you want to do, and he can do what he wants to do, all I do is make recommendations.
Sure.
But I recommend pretty strongly to cut that back.
Mhm.
You're an agency that if you get two in, that's pretty good.
Mhm.
And getting two in is reasonable. Trying to do more than two starts to kind of tax your I started to say manpower, man and women power.
Well, on that random inspection, should there be a clause stating it can't be same time as the annual inspection? Should there be like a 2-month window there where there
You
can't
can't
be?
do one. I don't think anybody reasonable would try to pull one the same day or the same month or something like that.
Right.
If you wanna put it in, I don't have any, it gives me no heartburn. How's that sound?
Okay.
Under Roman numeral 11, and this was just something I noticed when I read through this. It's talking about disposal of found, recovering evidentiary property. I'm assuming some of this property may be adjudicated as to go back to the owner or the witnesses or whatever, hanging on that for an additional 6 months after all legal requirements have been satisfied. What if that's somebody's car?
That's actually covered by state law, and I think.
So
you
this
get it-
is,
you-
okay.
Yeah. When something belongs to somebody, you give it back to them, and so you're covered with state law there.
Okay.
And what that does is within 6 months.
Right.
That puts a trigger on there that if you're doing your annual inspection and you're random, you should be finding the times that you got something more than 6 months beyond what you should have. That's the whole point.
And Rick's listening to you over the years, not only during this, the best thing is legally to get the evidence out of your possession.
Yes, sir.
Out of your evidence room as quickly as possible, but legally.
Yes, sir.
I mean, once, and someone just really has to stay on top of this. I mean, I'm former law enforcement too, and I know that evidence rooms are nightmares, and they are, they have been.
You know, it's interesting you said that because, I go back to 1977. And I know this sounds like a
I
long
don't
story.
go back that far, Rick.
So,
I was-
prior to
Still-
1985, state and local governments did not have to pay overtime. You before 85? You start before or after 85?
Oh, after. Yeah, I'm still in school.
You're a child. So prior to 85, state and local governments did not have to pay overtime. So guess what? None of them did. So every time you had a court case, you went to court every time it was on the docket, period. But when 85, when the overtime became mandatory, suddenly the city fathers are saying, maybe you should only go to court when you need to be there. But one of the things that happened as a result, if the case is being pled out, the officer's not there to see it being pled. Especially if he's working midnights, the disposition just kind of drifts away. It's in the court docket, court records, but we don't know about it at the police department. Prior to 85, we didn't have a problem getting dispositions because the officers were always there. Post 85, it was a plea. We got to go look them up. So that's another process that we've talked about. In fact, I think you received that today, if I remember what you told me right, inquiring the court clerk for the dispositions on a number of cases. But you gotta go through the there's the Overton County Circuit Court Clerk's office to get those things. And then once you have the disposition, couple of things to remember. Number one is, for two things, guns and drugs, there's actually a statutory trigger for when you have to be rid of it. For most other stuff, if you don't get rid of it, it's there. I like to use the phrase, if it doesn't have to be there and it's not there, it can't grow legs and walk away. So as soon as you can get rid of something, you get rid of it, legally. You do it correctly, but as soon as you can get rid of it, it needs to leave. Now, something you all are gonna have to work on a little bit. Up until about 2 years ago, all unclaimed property was the purview of the Unclaimed Property Division, State Treasurer's Office. Well, they got tired of us telling folks to send in the list to them and them have to determine disposition of unclaimed property unless it's cash. So they talked the legislature into removing that requirement for tangible property, which left us this thing called Dillon's Law that says cities can only do that which they're authorized to do by law. Well, there's no law, there's no longer a law to tell you what to do with unclaimed property. So our lawyers, Melissa Ashburn, you mentioned earlier, has written a sample ordinance that you're probably gonna have to take a look at on what you all are gonna do, not with real estate, but with the lost pocketbooks that are turned in and the lost this and the recovered that don't belong to anybody that you can find. Authorizing yourselves to declare surplus property and get rid of it. Those are the kinds of little oddball things that clog up our property room that we need to get out the door. So yeah, it's a mess at a property room.
Okay. On number 12, it says access to the main evidence in property room is restricted to authorized personnel only and should be limited to the chief of police
And captain.
and captain. So is our captain on that list of authorized personnel now?
This makes him there now. We talked about this, and again, later on, I think you need to take the chief out of there, and he'll designate the two people.
Okay.
But you gotta have two people. You gotta have two. Because what happens if chief wins the lottery, or the chief, God forbid, something happens to him, and he's in the hospital for a few weeks.
Okay.
So you have to have two.
Well, then it says the chief of police may appoint. If you've gotta have two, then that absolutely should say shall. I mean,
Yeah.
am I playing on words here, John?
I think you're not playing on words, you're correct. At some point, it should say shall. I think it should say he shall appoint two. Right now, I think we're okay, okay?
Okay.
I mean, you all can make the changes you wanna make, but I think you're okay right now.
All right, so to follow up on a comment that you made earlier, I'm just curious, can you expand upon your statement that you said, we all know that the cash was not in evidence room?
It was in a safe, so I'd say that, and I probably misspoke relative to the comptroller's office. I try real hard not to do that, where the comptroller's office is involved in something, and I'll not speak to something, and I probably had a slip there, but it was in a safe.
A safe?
That's as far as I think I can safely go.
Okay.
Okay, is there any more, questions? For Mr. Barton, you wanna take action and, for the approvals of Mr. Barton, this is his recommendation, on procedure as far as the evidence room is concerned. Does anyone wanna take any action? Is this your recommendation?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Barton?
I've reviewed what the chief's put together, made a number of recommendations to him. I think he's incorporated pretty much everything that I recommended, along with what he's spent some pretty good time putting together. I think it's pretty good.
Motion approved.
Motion made, Vice Mayor Ken Dodson,
Second.
second by Alderman John Clough. Any discussion? Roll call vote, Ms. Bates.
Alderman Coleman,
No.
Alderman Dale,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dotson,
Yes.
Alderman Langford,
No.
Alderman Speck,
Yes.
Alderman Clough,
Yes.
Motion passed 4-2. Thank you, Mr. Barton. You're welcome to stay or be dismissed.
I got a doctor's appointment in the morning in East Tennessee. I'm gonna head to the house.
All right, they're gonna get that blood, ain't they? Just did it about a week ago, my friend.
Hey, sir.
All right, item number 2 is the second reading on the ordinance 2021-6-2. This is the slum ordinances. We, passed on the first reading last month. We, had a, public hearing on it, but, I have met, via Zoom, with Miss Ashburn, from the University of Tennessee MTAS. And these are the recommendations, that she recommended along with our general counsel, Mr. Meadows. So it's went through the check and balances, and I think it will help us, to continue, to enforce these property maintenance codes.
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Alderman Speck. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Coleman. Any discussion? Roll call vote, Ms. Phillips.
Alderman Dale,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dotson,
Yes.
Alderman Langford,
No.
Alderman Speck,
Yes.
Alderman Clough,
Yes.
Alderman Coleman.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Motion passed. Item number 3 is the second reading on the unclaimed property ordinance, 2021-6-3, unclaimed property. Again, this is, another issue, that we have had that, actually the airport had that actually brought this up. Jason Duke, our, chairman, brought this up, and it was about someone not claiming a plane, that had, or the shell of a plane that had not been, moved in quite some time. So, with the help of MTAS and our general counsel, we came up with this ordinance, passed on the first reading. We had, of course, had a public hearing on all these ordinance, no one's here, and, need a motion to
Motion
approve.
to approve.
Motion made by Alderman Chris Speck,
Second.
second by Alderman Ken Dodson. Any discussion? Roll call vote, Ms. Phillips.
Alderman Clough,
Yes.
Alderman Coleman,
Yes.
Alderman Dale,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dotson,
Yes.
Alderman Langford,
No.
Alderman Speck,
Yes.
motion passed.
Motion passed. Item number 4, second reading on ordinance 2021-6-4, change to the, change to zoning ordinance. As we had Mr. Tommy Lee here, to talk about that last month, and had a public hearing on it as well. This went through the planning commission as well, as their recommendation, so, I'll need a motion to approve this.
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Alderman Speck,
Second.
second by Alderman Dale. Any discussion? Roll call, Ms. Phillips.
Vice Mayor Dotson,
Yes.
Alderman Langford,
Yes.
Alderman Speck,
Yes.
Alderman Clough,
Yes.
Alderman Coleman,
Yes.
Alderman Dale,
Yes.
motion passed.
Motion passed. Item number 5, which will be tabled, until our next meeting, in the work session, the board, it appears to come up with a plan, but, we're gonna bring, the, nepotism policy back, for your counseling, John, and everyone will get that in the next few days, and also be in your packet, in August. So, our next meeting in August, calendar, will be August the 2nd. So that'll be brought up August the 2nd, no action to be took at this time. New business, no, new business for downtown revitalization. Mr. Evans is not here. Item number 2 is a flood mitigation update. We did have a town hall, meeting with the residents, or the residents and or property owners, that the flood, affected, when we had our last disaster. We had via Zoom, we had Miss Donna Warden there from TEMA, of course we had Miss Clayton and Miss Ackerman from, UCDD. And I felt like a very positive meeting, good Q&A session. Does anyone need an update? I don't, do we need an update, or is that sufficient? Cause Is there any developments, Ms. Ackerman or Ms. Clayton, that has came up?
They're gonna try to submit by the end of the week.
Okay,
We're still
so
finalizing everything.
explain on that just a little bit more, try to submit what?
Donna Holden from TEMA has all the information on all the applications. We're basically just going through and fine tuning and making sure all the i's are dotted, t's are crossed, and it should go to TEMA by the end of the week.
Okay, thank you. So it'll be back on the, agenda for August the 2nd, okay? Any questions? Yes.
Mayor, it might be, good to just clarify for the board how it will work once the funding, is approved, hopefully, in terms of the way the city will acquire funds to go out and purchase the properties from those who are willing to accept the values, appraised values, and then the city would then get reimbursed by FEMA for those funds.
That's right.
I just make sure that everybody knows that that's the grant works.
That's right. That's exactly right. Thank you, Mr. Combs. Any questions for, Ms. Clayton or Ms. Ackerman about the hazardous mitigation update?
Did you have any feedback from any of the people that were there that night that were indicated that they may wanna send additional photographs or provide any additional documentation? Did anybody follow up after that?
Marcia Smith, she sent photographs,
Okay.
and Pat, we already had her
Yeah,
photographs.
okay, good. It was a good meeting.
Okay, if there's nothing on, nothing else on flood mitigation, we go to, Mr. Greg Davenport, J.R. Wofford.
Thank you, Mayor and councilors. Appreciate the opportunity to, I guess, get acquainted with you on a closer basis here. And I am.
Excuse me, Ms. Ackerman, you're free to go or you say however you want to do it. Rebecca, same for you. Thank you. Go ahead, Greg, sorry.
I echo the last gentleman's statement that it's good to see people. I never appreciated it as much as when I had to wear that stinking mask. So, I came up here tonight to talk to you about, two things. They're both related to your water system. The first item is we opened bids today on contract 21-01, which is the CDBG water system rehabilitation project. We had 3 bidders. Ironwood Construction and Engineering of Crossville at $643,000 and change. John T. Hall of Sparta at $707,000 and change. And W&O, here in Livingston at, right at $900,000. We did have a deductive alternate. Let me back up. This project replaces old, dilapidated, leaking, undersized water lines on 7th, Good Pasture, Church, several other streets in the downtown area. And there's two reasons. Number one is to reduce leakage. Number 2 is, and equally important, is to provide increased fire flow at areas around town. So there are areas in your town now that you can't get adequate fire flow, and this project will help reduce the amount of those areas.
Are any of those streets the ones that we just paved?
No.
Okay, thanks.
So we did have a deductive alternate in there, and the purpose of that is to reduce the scope of the work if there was not enough funding for the project. In order to fully fund the project with Ironwood Construction at $643,000, the city, there's basically $587,500 available in the project to do the work. So, in all transparency, the city will have to contribute an additional $56,000. It's my recommendation that you move forward with the project and you contribute the money, because one of the lines is right there on Church Street, and it's a full overlay of the pavement on that street, which is $75,000 of that cost. So that's paving that you will not have to use out of your annual paving budget. I did, made one call to someone that I trust that I would like to remain anonymous on Ironwood. We've never worked with them. He said they'd had several projects with him and they did good work and that he had no problem working with them. So it's my recommendation that the board, award this project to Ironwood Construction Engineering in the amount of $643,512.50.
Right. You'll talk about a grant for this that we got to pay.
That's what I just said, the construction budget, oh, it's funded by a CDBG grant, it's $625,000 grant.
Okay.
The five, yeah, the five,
Yeah.
the 587.5 is money that's already allocated in the grant and your match.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. All right. So CDBG is paying the bulk of this. So is there a motion to accept this recommendation to, Ironwood Contractors, is that the?
Ironwood Construction and Engineering LLC.
All right, thank you. Motion made by Vice Mayor Ken Dodson, is there a second? Second by Alderman Speck, is there any discussion?
How much money we have to come up with?
$56,000.
56,000,
We got it.
we do have it.
Yeah. Any more discussion? Roll call vote, Ms. Phillips.
Alderman Langford,
Yes.
Alderman Speck,
Yes.
Alderman Clegg,
Yes.
Alderman Coleman,
Yes.
Alderman Bell,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dotson.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you.
Mhm.
The second item that I would like to discuss with you is related to the water system. It's about the proposed zone metering that we talked about. I guess it's been 3 or 4 months ago that I came to, I can't remember if I came or not. I may have just been on
Zoom,
yeah.
you Zoom.
We've not
Anyway.
seen one over here.
I'm like, I can't remember what we did. Anyway, what we discussed at that time, when I say we, this group, is that we couldn't figure out a way at Gerald Walford to split the downtown area into zones so that I could, like, you know, at night go and close a certain amount of valves and read this tank level, and between midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning, that's pretty much gonna be leakage unless you've got an industrial user or a hospital or something like that. There's just, the water system is designed and intertwined, which is a good thing, but it's just not, it's not something that I think will be successful. So, and the reason is that there's a lot of lines, we don't even know where they are, the valves don't work, or maybe there's a 4-inch connection somewhere that no one, it could've been there for 60 years and no one knows about it. So, that differs from the rural areas outside of town. In those areas, there are a lot of lines that just kind of go out off of ridge points at Hillham and up at Monroe that we can valve off and we can sub-meter the water going in that direction. So what we talked about was putting in 15 zone meters out in the rural areas so that the usage in the middle of the night can be metered. That's very important, because if you've got a line that goes out there and you got 20 customers on it and your minimum flow at 3 a.m. is 15 gallons a minute, you probably got 15 gallons a minute of leakage out there. The other thing it does is you can profile the data and you can set a baseline in a certain area, and let's just say it goes up to 20 gallons a minute. Well, you know you got a leak out there somewhere. So there's 2 different concepts for trying to determine where leaks are in your water system. In the downtown and kind of the main city area, we are proposing that Livingston design and let a contract for the installation of 1,850 residential water meters with acoustic measuring devices on them. And this is what we talked about before. And what that will do is it will do 2 things. Number 1, meters don't get faster with time, they get slower. So a 10-year-old meter that's maybe got 1 million gallons through it may be registering at some percentage of 100%. So you're giving them more water to pay for. The second thing is, according to the information from the vendor, there's an acoustic listening device on that. And let's just say in a highly developed area of Livingston where there was maybe 1 house every 100 feet or 1 house every 150 feet. You could put one of these on every other house meter and it will sit there and record data. And what it does is it knows that if it gets a loud noise at, you know, Monday morning at between 8 and 10 every once a week, that's probably the garbage man, okay? But if it has this constant sound that it's hearing all day long and all night, that's probably a water system leak somewhere. So what it does is it downloads this into a data recorder that a Livingston employee would drive around in a truck. They don't look at a meter anymore. It just zips the data into the handheld. And it develops green, yellow, and red dots in your water system where there's sound. And what that does only really one thing for you. It narrows down where the guys need to go look. So for this to be successful, the guys have got to have the manpower and the time and the energy and dedication to go out there and find these leaks. But I don't know of a better system to put in the main city area. So we are recommending that you move forward with a project with 1,850 meters. Some of them got acoustic measuring on them, some of them don't. And then 15 zone meters out in the rural areas in Hillham and Monroe and other parts of town over towards the water plant. So I have an engineering contract here. This is what Curtis said I brought. That is an amendment to the one we've already got for the leakage rehab. That we put together specifications and we bid and administer the project for you.
Any questions for Mr. Davenport?
This will help us toward that, whatever memorandum of understanding that we had with.
Correct. And Ken, I'm glad you brought that up. Y'all remember that the Water and Wastewater Financing Board sent you a request for information. It was a pretty exhaustive request. We put it together, reviewed it, Curtis signed it, we sent it in. You know, the next step they're gonna take is gonna be more severe than that. They're not just gonna come back and send you another letter. They're gonna come in and say, you shall do this or you shall do something else. So I don't really see this as, you know, you've got to know, you've got to have some data. That's what you gotta have. It's like wandering around in the dark trying to find something. And this project, not only will it help you with your water system meters, which you need to replace anyway, and I don't think we've replaced as many recently as there been some diminution?
Yeah, we didn't replace as many last year as we did the year before.
Right. So there's some of this we're just catching up.
How do you propose we pay for it?
The way.
Can I take that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, what I had talked to the Board of Aldermen about in the past is this American recovery money that we would be getting from the federal government, down, it's $1,083 is what we would be getting. Now, I talked to, Mr. Mumpower today, which is the comptroller, and, the money, the state of Tennessee has not even signed the paperwork to get the money yet, okay? According to Mr. Mumpower, it will probably be around August or September that they think that they're gonna sign, okay? Water, or wastewater, infrastructure or broadband is what he continued to say to me. And the usage of what some of this money could be used for. Kelly has sent out, and thank you, Kelly, send out some things to the Board of Aldermen that could be used for the money as well. But the reason that I asked Greg to put all this together is that a couple of things. We're under restraints a little bit from the Water Board of the state of Tennessee. And simply, I think Jerry's here that can tell you, he needs some help. He needs some help finding the leaks. I mean, we're losing 1 million gallons of water a day. That's what we have said we're losing. And I that's just, we need some help.
About
I
how
mean,
much
if
is
you're at, I mean, according to our reports, at 49% of your water, and that's just gotta stop. And, I mean, the guys are working themselves to the bone, but the reality of this is all leaks don't surface. And, with the manpower we got, it's all we can do is to try to keep the water leaks off the boards. So we don't have, respectfully, we don't have a designated crew of 3 or 4 that could go out and look for leaks. The automated water meter system seems to be a fix because we feel like that it's gonna show up immediately. In between each water meter is that device that Mr. Davenport was talking about that will show that there's a leak. Out in the county, in the Monroe, Alpine, Hillham areas, a mechanism that Jerry just don't have now is just slowing or figuring out the zone of to where the leak is and quickly going and fixing it. Now, and we've met about this all day today, but you know, and then they've got another mechanism where they put their earphones and they start sounding the water lines to try to figure out where this is. Now, I am recommending this along with Mr. Davenport because I think we need some help. I think, and Mr. Clough, to answer your question, we're still putting those numbers together. But I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. Is you know, you start looking at not just what the cost of water, but you got to look at the overhead from the water leaves the water treatment plant, and it goes out to the customer. So I will get you that number, but I don't have it currently. But we need some help, folks. I'm asking you for some help.
I'm sure it'll pay for itself, but what's the total cost of these meters and all this stuff?
It's gonna be about 1 point, with the zone meters, what was the number you had, Greg?
It's about $1.1 million.
Well,
$1.1 million, and you said we was gonna get like $1 million grant money?
$1,083,000, yes.
So actually, we're not gonna be a whole lot of money out of pocket.
No, but what I would recommend, David, and we don't have to do it today, but what I would recommend is, according to the comp trucker, that we're gonna get the money, okay, as
But
soon
not
as the
till
state of
August.
Tennessee. Well, it's gonna come in spurts.
Right.
So in other words, you may get, the city of Livingston may get $150,000 in September, and may get $75,000 in October, but you're gonna, over the fiscal year, you're gonna get the $1,083,000. So my recommendation would be, is to borrow the money and let this, American Rescue Recovery money stand for the loan. And as the recovery money comes in, we just simply pay the money back. But we can start the project, and I think I just think that's what we need to do.
And I'll add back to Mr. Coleman's question. Today, really all you're voting to do is to let us go ahead and get our part out of the way. And that could take 4 to 8 weeks of us working to get the job ready to bid. So, you know, we can come back when the money's available, when it gets announced, and you can make, you know, those type. I mean, I just don't wanna see you wait. The money gets announced and then we're 3 months behind because we didn't act in an expeditious manner.
Well,
I appreciate that, and I'll state my concern again. I realize that we need this. I'm convinced there's a need, and I realize that it's something we've got to do. I guess I'm discouraged and disappointed that we're rushing into making the commitment that we're gonna use our COVID funds for this, when in the past, every water project we've ever done before was funded by either rates within the department, or bonds, or grants. And it's clear that there's a variety of ways that this COVID fund could be utilized. Is this the best use for it? Maybe so. Have we exhausted our efforts to finding other grants, other options for financing? We also have a stormwater problem around Dillon Pond that, you know, we looked at spending some possible dollars on trying to fix. I guess I'm curious, have we exhausted grant opportunities or paying for it within the water fund?
When we speak about grant opportunities, the main grant opportunity would be CDBG. You've got one now. You can't get to it one time, as far as I know, unless there's some type of disaster grant. You know, that pretty much leaves some type of EDA grant, that's Economic Development Administration, that's strictly tied to jobs. And when I say jobs, I mean like, you probably need a couple hundred jobs, not 10. Then we trickle on down to rural development. You can get maybe a 25 to 30% grant for them, but you pay a higher interest rate, and your amortization schedule is 38 years. All right, and the project will probably be delayed. I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but those type of federal funded projects have a longer timeline than what we're talking about here. Then you got SRF down from there. Now there's a lot of, I'm hearing a lot of chatter up in Nashville about that even behind this COVID money, that there's a surplus in the state, that there's more money coming from the feds. You know, some of my friends in government have said, you're about to be busier than you are now. And I'm like, look, we can't bid stuff unless it's designed. So, you know, I get what they're saying, but all it's really gonna do is pay for stuff that's already designed. So I think there's probably some more opportunities for more money to come down. I don't know what the requirements will be for it. I don't know what the restrictions are. And I can't speak for your stormwater and the rest of your city, you know, issues you face. I'm just your water and sewer engineer. But I do know that whether you use this COVID money or not, you're probably ultimately going to have to do something regardless. So,
I don't think that's a question.
yeah.
So starting the project, of letting you finish this and getting bids, doesn't necessarily say how we're ultimately going to pay
Well,
for
you
it.
don't go to get bids until you know what your financing's gonna be, right? Yeah.
I mean,
You're not gonna let it
we're gonna give you an
bid
estimate of
until-
how much it's gonna be, and then you need to figure out,
How we're gonna pay for it.
Yeah, I mean,
And then go to get bids.
right.
Make the motion, we proceed then with letting you do your part.
Right.
I'll second
No,
that.
I'm fine with that part.
Okay, so we got a motion and a second to allow our engineer to proceed, with getting everything ready, basically.
Correct.
Does that go as far as actually getting the bids? And just
This
not
contract right here,
awarding them?
this contract right here is the preparation of the specifications and the plans for the zone meters, bidding and award, and construction administration. It takes it all the way through. Obviously, we worked with you all for a long, long time, longer than anywhere else I know of. If y'all put a pause on it, we're not gonna send you a bill for something we didn't do. I think you're ultimately gonna have to do something. So it takes it all the way through construction.
Thank you. All right, we got a motion, second, any more discussion? Roll call, vote, Ms. Phillips.
Alderman Speck,
Yes.
Alderman Clough,
Yes.
Alderman Coleman,
Yes.
Alderman Gale,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dodson,
Yes.
Alderman Langford,
Yes.
motion passed.
Motion passed. Any other business, Mr. Davenport?
No, sir, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You can be dismissed, or you're more than welcome to stay. Okay, last but certainly not least, item number 4, is the memorandum of understanding between Overton County and the city of Livingston, to house city court, and just a reminder of where we are. If you remember, Tosha came in and said that where our fire department sleeping quarters was not, there was no ingress egress, and so what we have done temporarily, well, I guess permanently for permanent, let's just say that, has moved the firemen downstairs. They are now in the, what used to be our training room, which is now, their sleeping quarters, or there is ingress egress, okay? And we are, with this memorandum, it would allow city court to be held at the Justice Center, one night a month, which is usually what we do, the third Thursday of the month, to be held at the Justice Center. And this is the memorandum of understanding. There's no cost affiliated with this. And, you know, this is the route we're going to go. We looked at City Hall, and it just wasn't secure enough. I mean, we could do it if we had to, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't secure. And with money, that people put in that deposit box and things of that nature, we just felt more comfortable, to have court at the Justice Center and or the courthouse. And the chief and I met with, Sheriff Garrett and County Executive Danner, and, Miss Kelly Williams was there, which is city judge, along with, Miss Lily Ann Sells, which was the county attorney. I've sent this to Mr. Meadows, and John, do you have any issues with this one?
No issues with it at all.
Okay.
I agree that that would be a much better location than City Hall, totally due to the layout of City Hall and the number of people that sometimes show up to city court, so.
Right. Okay, does anybody have any questions on the memorandum of understanding between Overton County, Tennessee and the city of Livingston, Tennessee, and Allen City Court? If not, I will entertain a motion, to accept this memorandum. Motion made by Alderman Langford, second by Alderman Speck. Any discussion? All for the motion, let it know by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. All right, motion passed. We will have the tour, Jason Duke is sitting out front to take the tour of the airport grounds and the projects that we have coming up. Need a motion to adjourn. Motion made, Ken Dodson, second by Rex Dell. All for the motion, let it know by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion passed.